Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 4 today in a conversation between Mark Cowan, the CEO of Put It Forward, of course, and myself, Jim Mullarney. We're going to talk about marketing automation. Mark, how are you today?
I'm great, Jim. Happy to be here and have this conversation.
So let's talk about the marketing automation problem. First of all, historically, as you well know, there's been too much of a focus on metrics. There's too much of a focus on automation without truly connecting with audiences. And oftentimes, propensity and sentiment have been ignored. Can you drill into those for us a little bit today?
Sure. And I'm conscious of being in the role of a CTO or CEO where a lot of what we do is metric focused, right? In terms of performance management, across our organization. And that's not to say that we run our marketing without any metrics. There's certainly that is a component of it. But I think a lot of the problem around marketing automation is a bit of a wicked problem, frankly, in that when you become more metric focused, you become inclined to invest more in the automation and do more to drive those metrics. And therefore step away from what I think is the true intent and purpose of marketing, which is to establish relationships and dialogues with the people or audiences or constituencies that they're trying to engage with. So, when you focus purely on metrics in the marketing automation context of, how many opens, sends, emails, tweets, twits, those things that you're sending out there, you end up kind of taking yourself away from the true intent of what it is that you're trying to do when you're measuring it along that context. Whereas the real focus is around understanding what the sentiment is of a group or constituency and how to engage them and what's the propensity of them to respond to you based on the message that you're bringing. That, I think, is a bit of the dilemma, frankly, that faces many marketing organizations today around the automation concept.
Speaking of that, many thought leaders in the space believe 50% of all marketing will be automated in very short order. Especially with the amount of AI trickling in. What impact do you think this has on marketing automation platforms today? And how is Put It Forward positioning themselves for that?
I don't know where that statistic comes from or what's baked into that, but I'll take it at face value. I'll say that it's quite possible to automate, a huge percentage of, kind of low value, high repetitive tasks in any part of the organization, marketing or not. Where Put It Forward comes into that picture is really around on kind of two levels. One is certainly connecting all the different dots together and therefore being able to orchestrate the different functions across those and automate those low value tasks, number one. But really where the high value is understanding the signal that's actually going through all that data and all those, actions that you're taking to understand, where the true value is and what that intent is. Does 50% of automation in marketing mean that people are going to be doing that much more or that much less marketing? I think is maybe a more provocative question to ask as a result.
So a lot of people believe that certain marketing automation platforms are a little bit off base nowadays because they don't weave in enough information about psychographics or have enough info on predictable outcomes. And you've seen some changes in the marketplace with AI and different types of data vendors and ABM providers and CDP players, etc., all jumping in to maybe, I don't know if it could be said, shoring up some of the gaps or holes within marketing automation platforms. I'd love your point of view on psychographics and predictable outcomes and maybe where map platforms are going today or what they could be missing out on.
I think that it's a good question. There's a lot in there. I think that the intersection of psychographics and predictable outcomes is outside the boundaries of marketing automation systems, in part because marketing automation systems are focused purely on automation. When you look inside of other parts of organizations or other verticals that spend a lot of time looking at the holistic, data set or using that holistic data set as part of what they're doing, whether that's in finance or intelligence or any type of competitive analysis, they're blending those pieces of information together in a lot more effective and creative ways to understand mood and therefore understand what they can actually influence. So I don't think it's that marketing automation systems are off base purely. I just think that they've really emphasize the automation piece and not the marketing piece as much, and therefore have resulted in, being able to, engage in different channels and work the way they do, and so forth, as opposed to, bringing in other, data segments, frankly, as part of their analysis and consideration when they're creating campaigns. And a lot of that is now being done outside the map and then being fed back into it, in terms of like an execution engine.
So if you talk about the arc of a map solution and you were designing a map solution today, would you focus on automation and less on marketing, or the other way around?
That's a fair question. I've never really architected one of those, but I will say that, given the opportunity, I would re-architect it from the perspective of being more inclusive of the data sets that we're using in order to drive and understand, to drive outcomes-based understanding on sentiment and more of the, the broader data set that's involved, rather than just automating discrete parts of a singular process.
Let's jump into the Put It Forward and marketing automation platform process. Can you walk us through your 5-step process?
Sure. Typically it's not, unlike sort of the other scenarios that we get into. First is establishing connectivity in between, the core applications that you're trying to work with. The difference though here is where when we step into this, we actually start monitoring the data as it's flowing through it, in order to start identifying repeatable patterns which correspond to signal intent or sentiment. And then we use that and kind of start driving outcomes out of that. So for example, if you wanted to say who of my prospects or customers has a high probability of doing X, maybe it's churn, maybe it's purchase, maybe it's expand, how do I trigger something that's personalized, or trigger a communication or an event that's personalized to their situation at that moment in time. So a lot of that is kind of baked into the process that we follow. I think if I were to say one thing that people kind of move across very quickly, where they would get a lot more value out of this, is to be really focused on the orchestration aspect of this, around sort of the audience integration. What I mean by that is being focused on what the rules are and the conditions are that you want to have a particular outcome be triggered.
Let's jump into the actual results from all of this. Obviously, sure, we talked about hyper-personalized experiences being critical, monitoring the sentiment in real time, tidying up attribution, which is kind of the raison d'etre of any marketing organization. You talk a little bit about how Put It Forward actually solidifies these results and brings them to the fore when working alongside a map solution.
Well, the really simple answer is that, we end up kind of segmenting and chunking out the experiences into smaller bite-sized environments, smaller bite-sized steps that you can start putting together and stitching together, in more meaningful ways, based on smaller audience sets, and therefore have a more personalized experience. And the kind of the second component of that, what drives that is really sentiment, right? So the two pieces kind of hang together, which is, if you get the personalization component right, and you get the sentiment piece right, you end up driving a very compelling experience for a user, and therefore, the attribution of those things becomes self-fulfilling. And as an example, what I mean by this is we've seen, and everyone sees this in marketing, where you have an audience that's this big, it's the whole world, or it's 1 million people or 1 million contacts that you've gone out and created and nurtured and curated to define, hey, these are my perfect personas and my perfect audience that I want to work with, that I want to go after. Yet after shaking the tree and running them through all your various funnels, you end up with maybe a small fraction of that is actually being viable customers or prospects. That means that, and let's say hypothetically it's 1,000 out of that million, the 1% of 1%, as it were. That means that 999,000 other people that you think are viable customers of yours have just dropped off, right? And that you spend a heck of a lot of time investing in that, identifying them, engaging them, and creating content around, something that you end up never talking to. And that is sort of the problem. And so what we do is we hyper focus that very, very quickly and get down into smaller audiences that are more viable based on the outcome that you're looking for, not just what you think they should be looking for.
So this brings us to our takeaways. I'm glad you said that about what I have here is bullet number 4, but let's talk about the top 3 first. 1,
sure.
Marketing is influencing outcomes, not clicks. Hyper-personalized experiences are already available from the data that the enterprise has, which is very interesting. It just needs to be mined correctly. And the third point, sentiment drives experience. And if you do these 3 correctly, attribution will come as an added bonus. I'll leave that with you, and you can add some color commentary.
I don't think I really, frankly, have a lot to add to that, because I think what you said here is self-evident. Other than re-emphasizing that the role of marketing is to influence outcomes, behavior, relationships. If you're measuring marketing by how many clicks, page opens, email opens, tweets, retweets, whatever it may be, I think you've ultimately failed. At kind of the function of what marketing is. The way you get through that is by, having deep insights and having, a better relationship, as it were, to be cliche, with your customer.
In summary, then, what we are beginning to open here is kind of a Pandora's box that's going to hit on other areas in subsequent chapters, like the impact of Put It Forward on a CMS platform. We're going to talk a little bit about ABM. We're going to talk about AI and Copilot. So far, any final thoughts from you, Mark, before we close?
No, this was a fun conversation. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Jim.
Good. I'll look forward to the next chapter. Thank you again.
You too. Bye-bye.